Okay, continuing on here, I have a new slide. I took the one line on the old slide that we didn't finish. I thought you might be sick of staring at that previous slide, so I made a new one with a bunch of notes. There's a method to my madness here of just having all of these notes on one slide rather than separating them, is that when you go back, you can just look visually without watching the whole video, and like the screen grab of the video will have all the notes on it, so you don't necessarily need to go through a video if you want to do a quick review of some of the points. Of course, it may be very helpful to watch the whole series a few times, but it's helpful when you want to do it, not when you just want to find, or remember some points. This is also, we can see how the way that I'm structuring this video series, at some point you'll have a breakthrough, right? And then, and it might be you watch the whole thing, it might be 2/3 of the way through, it might have been when you watched the first video the first time, and then we're just kind of consolidating and integrating from there. Also notice that we can't do this exactly step by step. I don't have a note on this slide to discuss step by step, but let's take a moment with that. Step-by-step instructions is more like when you're coasting or in flow after a breakthrough. Like in our OMG Machines coaching, we use step-by-step instructions whenever possible for an individual topic where it applies. But overall, if you're trying to understand free traffic or master it, or how to do an online business in general, or how to get clients, or how to make sales on a website, there isn't a clear step-by-step, because again, step-by-step presumes the old model where you're just kind of walking through, checking off boxes, right, hitting milestones over like a linear distance, and that presumes no breakthrough is necessary. It presumes you can, again, just follow each step pretty easily without having to figure out things. And sometimes that's the case, and then in those cases, step-by-step works great. People want to be in flow. They want what happens after a breakthrough, right? We all want that. We all want step-by-step instructions if possible, and just to follow them and get a big, nice result. But that's the whole point of looking things in terms of a breakthrough model, this breakthrough and consolidating, is it's the only way to get to where you can actually be in flow and have good results while you're doing that. With this topic that we're talking about here, there's not really much of a step-by-step that I can give you. There's some places where I say, all right, here's the elements to a breakthrough, right? Or here's the steps to how you do it, right? When I said about you want to poke around to do reconnaissance, and then you want to organize your knowledge, and then you want to create a vehicle, and then you want to put your resources into things. But even that is only going to be particularly helpful after you understand, in order, those steps. Otherwise, each of the individual details is more just like a different angle on, or detail in helping you to get to a breakthrough or helping you to integrate. It's only after the breakthrough and a reasonable amount of consolidation that you can just be in flow and just go step by step easily. So that can explain why you see less step by step in the way that I teach than you might hope for, or that you might otherwise expect, or that you might think should be there, or whatever. But I get very good results with people ultimately with learning, and I understand it very well. And probably now you understand where I'm coming from with why you need to hit things from different angles. And imposing organization on that is just kind of an illusion. Instead, the organization needs to be in the mind of the learner, and it needs to be built after achieving a breakthrough. It needs to be built by themselves in their own mind, in their own way. And it doesn't have to only be in your mind. You can write out things on paper and so forth, but there isn't some objective organization of details that can necessarily take place. It has to be assembled in each person's mind. Sometimes for particular topics, like for understanding electricity and how it works, there might be a particularly common metaphor that's been figured out that helps most people. Like, when you're understanding electricity is pretty similar to imagining water going through pipes, and then instead it's like electrons going through wires. And it's not a perfect analogy, like most everything is not a perfect analogy, but it's a good mental model. And so it's a nice little breakthrough if I can figure out particularly helpful mental models or illustrations for particular topics, and I'm always looking to do that. But sometimes I have those, sometimes I don't. Even when I have one or think that I have one, though, if you just go straight to that model or that illustration, that kind of central idea, and explain it, it still doesn't necessarily spark a breakthrough instantly in someone else's mind. And you can notice this and not fall into this trap yourself. You might be learning a topic and you might be studying it for a while or working on it for a while, and then it all kind of makes sense to you. And then you're talking to someone else who hasn't had that breakthrough, and you feel like the very last thing that you encountered is the breakthrough or the thing that will help people get it, and you tell it to them as if that's going to have the same impact on them. But the thing that happened right before you had a breakthrough, that in and of itself is probably not the entire thing that caused the breakthrough. And so it probably isn't going to have the same impact on somebody else that it had on you. So keep that in mind when you're explaining things to somebody, or if you start to feel impatient that someone else isn't, quote unquote, getting something that you're saying. The other person is going to need to have their own breakthrough going through the whole process themselves. And you can't really rush it. You can just most efficiently go for a breakthrough, and that is the equivalent in a good way of rushing it. That's the fastest you're going to do a breakthrough, is by embracing the breakthrough process, not rushing it further or being impatient or getting frustrated, because all you've done then is just get yourself into that previous checkbox linear mentality where you're trying to make forward progress and feeling frustrated about that. If you're ever feeling frustrated, almost certainly you're accidentally back into the old model of achievement and results getting. Okay, so let's get to what's here on the slide. First, I want to have a clarification. Someone emailed me a question and it was helpful. They said that, like in the examples I was giving in the videos, I would talk about that you want to do one breakthrough at a time, but then I also described in my own life how I might work on law of implication and then switch over to working on OMG machines for a bit to have a breakthrough or do something there, and then I might switch back. So how does that? How do I make sense out of that? So it is definitely correct that you can't always just work on one major breakthrough at a time. So for example, if you're trying to get married or have a happy marriage, then it isn't like you can stop everything else in your life in order to do that. Some things need to happen over a time period. And also, I put the word major breakthrough because on the way to a happy marriage, and I'm not implying here that you should be married in life or anything like that, but it's just kind of a common goal that a lot of people want. So I use it as an example. But on the way to like a full happy marriage, then there can be a bunch of individual breakthroughs and bottlenecks and thresholds that you have to figure out and jump over. Escape velocity regarding various things. Where you're understanding yourself, and there's various little individual breakthroughs in understanding yourself, and then in terms of understanding that specific person, and then in terms of understanding what you're looking for in terms of a romantic partner, and then in terms of how it's going to play out in practice throughout your relationship or over the short, medium, and long term. So what you want to do is, as much as it's fairly easy to do this once you just kind of realize that I'm not speaking in kind of particular grandiose or absolute terms when I say work on one thing at a time. At any one moment, you don't want to have your mind scattered. You want to be working on one particular issue at a time. And then also on any one particular day, particularly like in between when I'm going to sleep, then I try to have my mind working on just one kind of problem or thing that I'm trying to solve or dig into, or get escape velocity regarding, that sort of thing. I try to have it working on one thing like that at a time. But then, of course, like when I'm building OMG machines, there's just things that kind of unfold over time. So it's not like I can get everything planned out forever with OMG machines where there's no more bottlenecks or thresholds that have to be jumped over before I can get on to LOI, right, law of implication. And sometimes you kind of get other people started with something, and then they have to go take their time and do what they're doing, and you have to wait on that. And so again, just kind of use pretty obvious common sense once you just see it this way. So it's not, again, like you fully can only work on one thing at a time, like in kind of a major grand way. But another way to look at it is that external factors will dictate that you can't just keep working on one thing in your life until you solve it and ignore everything else. But for your own part, your own contribution to your choices and how you go about achievement, then you want to do your best to work on one thing at a time as much as reasonably possible. And even with something as kind of grand as trying to make a whole big personal romantic relationship that works very well, what I did was I coasted regarding my career for the most part for a little while I worked on that. And so, and even that's not entirely true. I mean, I got my magic strategy training business off the ground with Mike during the same time period where in the first year that I was meeting my wife-to-be before I got married. Although at that point I had broken through with the relationship itself. Let me skip over here to this line. It's the fourth line here. Breakthroughs can happen much earlier than results. So the result of actually getting married and starting to have that marriage unfold, that can be looked at as a result in general, but it was pretty much flow and downhill or also some consolidating and so forth. I broke through pretty early with my understanding before I even met my wife-to-be. And then pretty early in us meeting with each other, it was pretty clear that everything was pretty great and there wasn't going to be really much of a problem with us relating to each other and really just having a kind of a lifelong relationship. And so between whenever that breakthrough might have happened early on, and then there were some opportunities to consolidate. When I met my wife, she actually didn't live in this country at the time, and so I visited a few times before she came over here to live. And so those visits were particularly a time of consolidating and integrating. Right, it didn't really need to do them in order to break through or to assure that we would get married. It was quite certain we would. And then there was times that we could relate and talk while we were apart, of course, as well with internet chat and so forth. But then otherwise, I could focus in and break through with getting things off the ground with Mike and with our first business together. All right, so I think that's not too difficult to understand, but it was a great question. I'm glad I was able to clarify that. Oh, and let me make sure that I've been thorough enough with this line that I skipped to where about breakthroughs can happen much earlier than results. When we're focused on these milestones and results and checking off boxes, then there's many problems with that model, but yet another problem with it is that and I alluded to this before, but I just want to make sure this is explicit and emphasized. This breakthrough consolidating stacking model allows us to take our eye off of a result which can be surprisingly irrelevant in terms of deciding where to focus and where to focus our resources and how to just overall strategically plan. Because again, the thing that we need to break through, the resistance might be broken well before we have the actual result. So if the result is you're making $10,000 a month, then you might break through where you create some sort of business or you even get a job, whatever it might be, before you actually start earning $10,000 a month, and that it's all just kind of downhill flow from there. So if someone's overly focused on $10,000 a month, then it's like if you're focusing in the wrong place visually, it's harder to see where the real thing you need to look at is like if you're playing a sport and you're focused in the wrong place, then you're not going to catch the important stuff going on. I'm no big football player, but let's say you're on defense and you are covering a receiver, like a long range receiver, wide receiver, and so forth. Then maybe you don't want to be watching the quarterback. Maybe you want to be watching the receiver, right? And if you were watching the quarterback, then you would have your eyes in the wrong place. And so something that would be obvious if you were looking in the right place is impossible to see because you're looking in the wrong place. So constantly people are looking at this result and trying to figure out how to get it. and then I'll be looking at the breakthrough, the bottleneck, the threshold that has to be overcome in order to get there. Not in order to get there, but in order to make it easy to get there, to where there's no more resistance to get there. And then I don't really need to be smart after that. It's just dead obvious if I'm looking in the right place. It's just I look and there it is, and I know what resources I need to spend, what's important, and what to do, and so forth. And it'll look sort of brilliant to other people, like, wow, how'd you figure that out, or how'd you realize that? But I was just looking in a certain place. It wasn't that my eyes were so sharp, it was just that I was looking in the right place. So as you start to do this more and more, you effectively behave or come across or get the results as if you're particularly brilliant, without necessarily being more brilliant in the sense if we're comparing brilliance to having terrific eyesight. You don't need great eyesight, you just need to look in the right place. I think every once in a while there's these kind of business breakthrough, these business books where there's like this whole new amazing system. I don't know, Six Sigma might be something like this. I don't really know exactly what it is. I think I heard about it, but it was maybe so obvious that I couldn't quite get what the point was, or else maybe it was smart. I haven't really looked at it that closely. But there'll be these business books, and they'll really work. Like, these people will be these consultants, and they'll get these incredible results, and all they're doing is this. And in essence, that's great, except for we want to have the whole model. We don't just, as I've mentioned before, sometimes people will just discover one little tiny aspect of what we cover in law of implication, and they could become a whole big, huge, successful guru or consultant or something just based on that one thing. So any kind of business efficiency or management model that gets you to focus on, or gets the manager to, or the assembly line planner or whatever, to focus on breakthroughs and bottlenecks and thresholds, and then integrating and consolidating, they're all of a sudden going to get a massive increase in efficiency. Even with like sales training, if you just take your sales staff and have them focus on what really is going to cause the breakthrough. Oh, that's another great example of breakthroughs can happen much earlier than results. If the result is a sale, then the thing that makes the sale inevitable might happen far before that, right? There might be a moment when the potential customer feels like, oh, this person like gets me, or they're on my side, right? Or they're like an us, not a them. And then also, if you also broke through in a different way, if there's also kind of no resistance regarding your product, if your offer is good, if it's something that they want, and they feel like you're on their side and you care, then the sale is going to be a joke, right? Super easy. But time-wise, it might happen at a later date, or even 5 or 10 minutes later. And so if people realize they need to just focus on understanding their offer and making sure that they understand the customer and where they're coming from, or understand that they want to be categorized as being on the customer side or the potential customer side, and being an us rather than a them. And they don't need to fake that, by the way. I mean, they can really view life that way, and it can be real. I don't necessarily mean this is like a fake sales technique at all. But if that's all you have to focus on, it can be particularly easy. So then the breakthrough happens, and you don't have to be some particularly great salesman in some other sense, but effectively you can be a great salesman because you just know what to focus on in order to have the breakthrough. And brains by default aren't going to pick this up, because what a brain does by default, the way that it acts, is when there's a desired result, that it's going to look around in terms of space and time. You might have heard me talk about this in plenty of other places, because it's such a common way that our brain operates. It's so central to understanding our brains and other people's brains. When there is either an expected result, like a result that's wanted, if it happens, or if there's an unexpected problem, your brain's going to do something similar. It's going to look around for what's the kind of unique, obvious thing that's close in space and or time, right? What's the closest, most unique, like pretty obvious cause in the environment. And so the way our brains will work is whatever happened kind of right before the sale, that's what it's going to feel like is important. Also, it's also just going to look at the entire sales process as a whole and all the details, and it's going to approximate and kind of jumble together all of those things. And so in the future, when you're trying to make a sale the next time, your understanding and your ability to focus in and direct your resources is going to be scattered, because again, either your brain's going to just look at the wrong cause altogether, or it's going to look at the whole sales process and as a whole and think the whole thing is what did it, rather than if you can zoom in on just the point or the particular breakthrough that you're trying to have, and then use the breakthrough process on it, right? What's the breakthrough process? If you know that you want to be kind of an us rather than a them with your with a potential customer, then you kind of poke around and you want to get a sense of the customer. And then as soon as you realize that, then you're not going to keep talking and talking and talking yourself, right? So if you have the right mental model, then it doesn't intuitively feel like you just talk and talk and talk, and then at some point the person buys, right? Clearly you need to poke around and get a sense, and a lot of that's going to involve them talking to you, and then you accumulate things you know. You also might realize I'm still sticking with this one detail to kind of zoom in, or this one example. One of the things you might know if you start to organize your knowledge about that sales situation and having them feel like you're an us rather than a them, you know that you probably don't like being interrogated, right? You don't just like being asked question after question after question. And like someone who's like part of you and like a kind of part of your group or one of you, they don't necessarily just pepper you with questions nonstop, right? So it's also not true that you're trying to interview or grill or interrogate the potential customer either. You just want to kind of poke, right? Just kind of, put something out there to kind of stimulate a little bit of conversation. If it takes off, good, and then you can kind of direct it a little bit or go with things that are going to be more helpful. And if the thing that you kind of toss out there or poke with doesn't work, then you poke somewhere else. You try different angles instead of just battering on one angle. If you're trying to make a sale, or if you're trying to have this breakthrough where they feel like you're part of that, part of their group, one of them, then what you want to do is rapidly try different angles to see where there's kind of a good point of entry, rather than just start by assuming that it has to be from one particular angle and you just kind of batter on it, right? Some people might really care that someone else is from the same region as them or went to the same college as them or something like that. But other people might not really do that. So you can even poke around and find that you went to the same college as the person. But if someone went to the same college as me, I really could care less. Like, I don't feel like me and them are the same, on the same team, or they're necessarily like an us or part of my little group or whatever that might be. I'm just like, I don't necessarily feel an affinity for a person just because they grew up in the same region or because they went to my college. Other people might feel a strong affinity for that. But by realizing that, then just because you find that we have something in common doesn't mean, if you're a salesperson trying to sell me, it doesn't mean that you want to just do a full frontal assault on that thing. You might still be sensitive to my reaction, whether I particularly light up. And then, if you mention like strategy games, or something like that, then I might light up and be very interested, right? If the person played Magic or something like that, and I did, then I would feel a real, pretty strong affinity for that person. Affinity means like a closeness, right? So realizing to look in the right place for where there's a breakthrough or potential bottleneck or threshold, then you both can look there and you can start to use the breakthrough method rather than by default going into the little milestone checkbox method. So you both are, in the sales example, you're both looking to create a sense that you guys are both on the same side, and you're not doing that in a linear fashion, but instead you're using the breakthrough method for it, where you're poking around, accumulating knowledge, and then kind of finding a place, kind of a point of attack or a nice little entry point, and then kind of focusing in there. If someone found that with me, where it might have to do with strategy games, or it might have to do maybe with something to do with online business, or maybe about relationships, who knows, right? But if they find that, then they might spend a few minutes just talking to me about that. That would be the example of like the vehicle, like that kind of thing they're using to push through or create, where now we have that kind of common ground and they're kind of building it out until it's big enough and solid enough that it kind of breaks through, and I feel like, yeah, this guy is like one of me, on my side, part of my group. And then continuing with the breakthrough consolidation method, once the salesperson has broken through with me in that way, then they would want to integrate and consolidate by probably referring to that later, right? Referring back to that common ground that we've built between us. One other thing that a salesperson selling to me might realize is that, look, I'm just trying to understand what the product is. I'm not trying to jump to a conclusion about whether I want it yet. Whereas that's a different way of operating than plenty of other people who are constantly have kind of a rating for how much they want the product at any one time, and they keep moving that rating depending on the next thing that they hear from the salesman. But I just want to understand, and when I'm asking questions, I don't really want like a long kind of a sales presentation about my question that I have. I more just directly want the answer because I'm just trying to accumulate understanding. I'm not busy judging. If they were to figure that out, then they could sell me a lot better. Often salespeople don't figure that out, and it's a bit tedious for me. And it makes it much harder for them to make the sale. For other people who operate differently, it's more the default way to do things, is that they're constantly judging a product during the sales presentation, and they kind of have a little bit simplistically, but it helps you picture what I'm saying. It's like they have kind of a rating on a scale of 1 to 10 of how much they want to buy the product, and they're constantly adjusting that numerical rating up and down based on the next thing that they hear. And so if you notice that, that's often how people are operating. So if you're talking to someone in a sales kind of way, and this isn't only if you're selling, there's often instances where you're trying to persuade somebody in normal life where you're not in business. But either way, it's good to be aware that your listener is often constantly judging and moving that little meter. They're successfully approximating to a sort of number or to see whether they want to buy. And in that case, if they ask a question, you want to get a sense of what answer they're looking for. Like I'm looking to just know what the correct answer is, but often, in other words, I typically, when I ask a question about a product or something, I don't necessarily have a right or wrong answer already in my mind. Again, when I'm building understanding, if I already decided what the right or the wrong answer is, that's going to get in the way of me understanding typically. But other people, it's much more common for someone to have a right or wrong answer in their mind ahead of time when they ask a question, and it might be wise to try to figure out what their answer is that they have in mind before you answer the question. Okay, let's move on to what I have here on the second line of these notes. And this won't really make sense just reading it. It's some notes for myself, and then it'll make sense to you once I talk about it in terms of what the words mean. All right, and this is a pretty important line, by the way. So the three terms I have written here, I have importance, and then I have resource management, and then I have people. I'll start with the last word first. I put the word people here because although people have resources and can provide you with resources, they have resources like money and their own efforts, like physical efforts that they might do with their hands or talking or typing, doing something on the computer. And they also, they have their own time and creativity and thoughts. But one of the core ideas that is true in life and is part of the law of implication course is that a person is a conscious being, and then separately they have a self. They have a brain, a body, and resources and so forth. So that distinction is critical for me and for you to the extent that you get it. And so I don't treat a person in the sense of a conscious being as a resource. So I treat their resources as resources, right? I understand that people have resources that I might benefit from or that I might trade with them for. But so I treat their self, like their money, their brain, their efforts, whatever, their potential efforts, as a potential resource. But I don't treat them as a conscious person or being as a resource. What that means is if I'm looking, if I'm going from breakthrough to breakthrough in my life and otherwise trying to be in flow, then I'm aware with my own resources of what breakthroughs I'm trying to achieve or what particular breakthrough I'm working on, and that's going to affect how I interact with other people or what resource I'm willing to trade with them. In that way, But in another sense, and this is very important to have both of these as a distinction, the person, the conscious being themselves, I don't deal with them differently based on whether I need something from them. Does that make sense? And this is really helpful as you integrate this into your personality. People are going to really like you very easily and consistently. It's going to be really nice for you. It's going to be nice for other people, but your life is going to be particularly easy. Like your relationships are going to really have this deeper thread there that's going to make your life quite easy. And so again, it's this distinction, and what I have is a very clear distinction that's very integrated into my actions and my thinking and my mental model of life, where each person deserves full respect and caring. Now that doesn't mean that I have resources that I can give to every person. So I'm not obligated to give necessarily time or attention to somebody, but I am always going to treat that person as equal to myself in terms of their time is just as valuable as my time. It doesn't mean that I'll trade an hour of my time for an hour of their time, but it does mean that if I make an appointment with them, then I want to show up on time, because at the point once I have an appointment with someone, then my time's not more valuable than theirs. Or their opinions aren't necessarily inferior to mine just because I disagree. If I have worked through and I have knowledge and I'm very clear on something, then I might understand that they're wrong. Even then, they could show me where my reasoning is wrong. But there's a certain way in which it's a little hard for me maybe to fully describe right here and now. But there should be a certain kind of, I'm picturing like a pipeline, but I don't know what it is, but a certain thread or part of how you interact with people in your life where it's not dependent on what you're trying to achieve and what you want from them. So there has to be kind of an independent path or thread between the two of you, where again there's a respect and there's a caring there, no matter who it is. Even if they're a stranger, you can be respectful and caring toward a stranger in as much as you're interacting with that person. So it's not that I feel obligated towards other people. There's no obligation in this really, but there's this respect and caring that is going to always be there. It's not going to fluctuate based on whether I'm upset with a person or whether they're doing what I want. And normally the way people understand the world is they mishmash a person, like a conscious being, in with the person's self, and mostly they just see the self, which isn't the conscious person. And so our brain is way out of whack, way out of proportion normally with seeing people as like objects and resources, and that comes across constantly, where people say, oh, I care about you, or I care about this person, but then when the person does something they don't like, they act differently towards the person. But there should be something separate where you act the same in a certain way. You might you might trade differently with a person if they've crossed you, or if they've shown that they're not going to treat your resources properly, or they're going to break their word, or if they're particularly negative in some way, then you might try to keep your resources away from being mixed with another person. You might not even, very possibly, you only have a certain amount of time and conscious focus and attention, and so it's not that you have an obligation to put that into somebody. However, there are people in your lives where, based on the nature of your relationship, either romantic or friend or business, there's a certain amount of baseline attention that a person could maybe expect from you, and that also shouldn't necessarily fluctuate. There should be that kind of stable base that they can expect. Even like if someone's a member of OMG Machines, then if they email me, there's a certain amount of time and attention that I'll put to their email just because they're a member, and it won't be zero. And generally, in every case, I'll read someone's email and I'll respond to them like a real person who isn't just a person who may or may not have something that I want. Above a certain level, then it becomes about trading and deciding what I want to trade with the other person and whether I want to go above and beyond that. But again, there should be kind of a stable, set apart amount of respect and caring, depending on your relationship with a person. Right? We can notice we even have this with strangers, right? There's a certain amount that we're willing to give to someone just because they're a person, like if they ask for the time, right? Or if they ask for directions or something like that, or if they're particularly hurt and we're the only person that can help them, things like that, then there's that certain kind of baseline amount of caring and respect. And there's a way of understanding this and doing this where it's really nice and where people are really going to, and you're going to really get a lot of benefit of the doubt in life. And also when you're having a difficult time, then you have people who aren't sitting there waiting to reciprocate how you ignored them when they didn't have something that you wanted. People can sense it, right? It's fairly obvious on some level, or it kind of adds up. At some point it occurs to someone, hey, this person's only nice to me or only talks to me when they want something. If that's how you're essentially operating with everyone in your life, then when you need help, it's going to be a lot harder to get it. On the other hand, if you operate in this good way, where you have this baseline of respect and caring for other people, then not only are they going to want to help you in the sense of reciprocating, but they're just going to want you to be around in their life, right? Even with OMG machines, it's nice. It's a pretty beautiful business. I don't mean that it's perfect, and I'm always trying to improve it up to the point where I feel like there's just no resistance, where someone can get in, and if they're willing to put kind of a particularly reasonable amount of focus into it, where it's just everything's just particularly awesome for them. And so I still want to improve it. I don't say this from kind of a cocky standpoint, but there's a certain beauty to OMG machines where it's not just that people feel like they owe, like various, either affiliates or members or partners in the business feel like they owe the business something, but it's a beautiful business where they want it to succeed because they want it to be there. And that's like an extra level and layer of support that's pretty awesome. Right, again, where it's not just reciprocating, it's not just that, it's not exactly even just gratitude. It's like enlightened self-interest, where people know that they want this business to stay around, or at least a lot of people do. And that's how you can be as well. And I'm not saying you aren't already like this in your life, but the more that you make sure you have this in your life with people that you have a relationship with that baseline of respect and caring, regardless of the circumstances, then people are just going to want you to be around in their lives. And so they're not going to want to see you get like taken out or if you fall, they're not only going to want to pick you up out of gratitude and out of reciprocation, but just because out of their own self-interest, they just want you to be functioning and on your feet, because it's just better for them. And that's a great thing to have going for you. A couple, I was about to be done with this, but I just had a couple of quick examples and useful details that are going to come up for you probably that'll further help to consolidate and integrate this. So in a business or personal or any relationship, one part of that caring and respect baseline can be that before you kind of like turn on someone or get upset at somebody, you make sure that you understand what they really said, right? Or what they really meant to do, or why they performed some action. It's weirdly common for people to jump to a conclusion way too quickly where there's not that baseline of respect, where they at least clarify and seek to understand what just happened, or give you a chance to realize you are wrong and apologize and try to make it right. And so that's one way to operate, to do this, that I'm talking about, where you have this kind of baseline of respect, regardless of respect and caring, regardless of the situation, no matter what's going on. One of the things is that baseline where you're not going to just turn on a person until you seek to understand for a reasonable amount of kind of time and focus first. If you operate that way, you'll also encourage other people around you to operate that way. And if you can surround yourself with people who are going to do that with you as well, you're going to be so happily off, right? Because you're not going to be one misunderstanding away from falling off a cliff with that person. And it's sad, but that is often how people's lives are and how people operate with each other. Is there like one misunderstanding away where there's not even a chance to clear up the misunderstanding? It's just like DEFCON. I used to say 5, but I guess DEFCON 1 is actually the biggest, the highest alert or whatever. People just kind of fly into a rage or get upset too quickly. Another example is, which is actually a little bit similar, is like either withholding communication or withholding intimacy withholding communication, like in a business relationship where you you don't answer the phone for someone that you normally would with the relationship that you have. It's okay if you exit the current relationship, business relationship, or trade, or current agreement or contract. That one thing you can do is complete on a particular agreement or contract and then not enter kind of a new, not like take the relationship or the business partnership to a new level or with a new project. That's fine, but in a current project, you probably want to round it out, even if someone's difficult or is someone that you don't want to trade with much in the future. A good way of operating is you almost certainly would want to complete on that particular project. If someone's an ally, then a baseline of respect is that you honor the alliance and that you don't need to check. And if you kind of put like a check in between whether you feel like honoring the alliance that time, then people are going to realize that, and it's going to not be an example of having this kind of basic threshold of or baseline of caring and respect. So if we have someone where they're an ally and they promote us, then I'll generally find a way to promote their product without saying, oh, send it to me, and if it's good enough, I'll promote it. Now, if they kind of particularly keep coming out with bad products, or if they particularly if they don't promote us back in the future, then I might not continue to operate as an ally with that person. They might be dropping the alliance themselves. So I don't mean that I maintain an alliance when the other person isn't, but if the alliance is currently operating, then I'm not going to treat the person at arm's length where they're not really necessarily an ally, and I have to judge their product. Now, what do I do then if the product isn't very good? I'll just find a way to promote it in a way that I'm not misleading the people that I'm promoting it to. Either we make a bonus and sell the bonus, or we talk about how the person themselves is a good person who has done good things in the past, or we just can say, here's what the product offer is, and you can judge for yourself, or something like that. But I'll find the best way I can do it within what the reality kind of constrains. And plenty of times the product will be genuinely good. Most of my allies are people that genuinely make good products anyway. So in a romantic relationship, you don't want to withhold intimacy based on what's happened recently. You want to have a baseline of that, because that's what a romantic relationship, that's part of what it is. It's an easy proof for it. You're not supposed to be intimate with other people generally, right? Like, let's say you're in a one-on-one relationship or a marriage, then you can't go outside of the marriage to have intimacy. And so intimacy is part of that relationship. It's part of the baseline. So you don't withhold it or mess with it, no matter what else is going on. And then same thing with like affection, and same thing if a person generally offers to make up or de-escalate or seek understanding, then I'll pretty much always reciprocate, unless they've really been deceptive in the past, right? Then that, like, if I think that if they're not actually doing that, but they're fully just tricking me, then that's one thing. But otherwise, part of my baseline with people is they'll always have a space with me, again, unless they've just proven to be just a particularly poisonous person where I just need to be away from them. But then the relationship itself is ended. Do you see? If I'm in a relationship in the first place, then people are always going to have an opening with me to be able to talk, like as rational people, and to seek understanding and to see if we can de-escalate and work through the misunderstanding. And maybe we come to understand that we just want to be totally apart, and that's okay, but at least they have that opening and we can, figure it out. So that right there, to the extent that you're not perfectly doing that, will be an amazing transformation of your life. It's going to be really terrific. And remember that however you act, you're automatically encouraging and affecting, and you're like a vector to affect other people to act that way too. It isn't necessarily, it's just a vector, so it might not fully get the result, right? You can have wind blowing in a particular direction, but a vehicle can move against that direction, or like a plane. So just because you're acting a certain way doesn't guarantee that other people in your life will act the same way, but it does actually guarantee that you'll be influencing them to act in that way, right? So it's more likely, and you're swaying them. And to the extent that it can be a bit of a continuum, then they'll move more on the, on the continuum to closer to the better way of acting, or the worst way of acting. If you're acting in a non-adaptive, bad way, then you're going to be bringing out the worst in other people as well. As a bit of a clue, if you constantly are coming to the conclusion that other people are bad, or some version of bad, lazy, uncaring, etc., it's pretty likely that there's something in you that is operating that way. It's not just that you're projecting; you could actually be influencing, and you could be attracting. So between influencing other people, bringing out the worst in what's already there, between attracting, and you might not even be attracting negative people, but you might just be repulsing better people, and then the only people that are left is the worst people, and you want to have someone in your life, and so that's the only pool you can pick from, right? So be very aware of that. If you spot that in yourself, you don't need to feel bad. Remember, we're not, again, you don't keep, whenever you're feeling bad about an achievement, you're back in that old model of checklist, trying to make forward progress and so forth. Just understand, okay, that's a breakthrough that I want to have. Is that the one that I want to have now first, or do I need to, mostly you want to take care of having enough money to eat, and then after that, you probably want to understand yourself in some of these central ideas like we're talking about here. Next. Okay, let me write the word strategy here as well on this line. Okay, I wrote the word strategy and I erased the word people because we thoroughly dealt with why I had the word people there, and now I don't want that to distract us. All right, fundamentally in life, strategy is about resource management, period. One way of looking at life is, or any game, and I'm not saying life is a game or not, but in both with a game and with life, the following is true. There's some purpose, and then you have some resources, and you're trying to, and your resources are going to be limited. And so you're trying to use your limited resources in a way that are most effectively get you to your purpose. All right, I just summarized life for you from one angle. There's various other angles to understand life, but that is kind of a full and complete way of understanding life. Again, it's not all of the angles, but it's a full and complete expression of one angle. There's a purpose, so I'll put purpose in here as one more word. And I might point out that if you get your purpose wrong, so just making up a purpose and getting it wrong is pretty bad, because then you're going to be looking in the wrong place for all of your resource management and so forth. On the way to a purpose, you have these kind of little individual breakthroughs or goals or results that and those are different meanings, but they're all kind of applicable to what I'm talking about here, that will either get you to your purpose, or you thought that they were going to get you to your purpose. Now, this breakthrough model in general and consolidating is going to help you to look in the right place for where you can divert your resources, right? In order to get to where you're trying to get to. If you've heard me in the past, then you know that one of the core concepts in the law of implication is that the purpose of your existence is that you're trying to have maximum conscious happiness. Conscious happiness it's redundant, but it's not redundant in the sense that people are confused about what happiness means. But without getting too much into it, you're trying to have maximum net happiness, which is not quite the same as goal achievement. But you're trying to have maximum net actual happiness that you feel, that you experience, not just that you theoretically have based on what your brain tells you you're happy or something like that, but however you're feeling. If you want to feel as good as possible as for over the course of your entire existence. And because we're all connected, and however you get to the fact that we're connected, one simple way is if you imagine that you just care about God in addition to yourself, then God is aware of how everyone else feels, and so God wants everyone to feel maximally good, not just now, but over the course of their entire existence. And so God will necessarily feel basically happier, to kind of put it kind of simply, based on other people being happier. And so also there's more opportunity for you to feel even more good as you care about others. Whereas if you want others to suffer, then the only way you can kind of really identify with that is feeling the suffering yourself. And so you reach kind of this negative diminishing returns, or not even, but kind of a negative spiral if you want other people to be hurt. So you want maximum net happiness for yourself and for everybody else. That is your purpose. That's the only thing that matters. And notice that unlike other goals or results, if you achieve what I just said, you're necessarily happy. There isn't some next step that you then go from there. So that does pinpoint where you actually want to get to, because if you get there, you can just stand there. And you don't need to feel happy about it. You will actually feel happy, right? So there's no flaw to that. That works. So there's your purpose, nothing else. Some people might say, oh, my purpose is to serve God or something like that. And that is more of either a breakthrough or an intermediary step, or you could think of it as logically connected if you understand it properly, where it logically might amount to the same thing as net happiness for yourself and everybody else, maximum net happiness for yourself and everybody else. But at least you should also understand at least what I just said about the maximum happiness. And then that can keep you from getting confused about anything else. All right, so since everybody is not already here with maximum net happiness, clearly, then, and since we don't know how to just coast there, we don't have like a series of steps that we just effortlessly follow to get there, then there's our little proof that we need to have breakthroughs, right? We need to figure things out in either kind of building things in reality, so to speak, in like external reality or in the environment, or we need to understand things in our mind or some combination of those things in order to get to where we're trying to get to. There's no distance that we're trying to travel, right? We're not like 20 miles away or 10 years away from max net happiness. Instead, and we're not some number of clear things that we need to build, or like there's not a checklist that we can follow either. Anything like that old model, it doesn't really exist in terms of getting to max net happiness. Clearly, instead, we need to have breakthroughs. And we need to stack those breakthroughs, breakthrough and consolidate, and we need to stack those things. And if we stack and break through enough pieces of understanding, then we can get to whatever maximum happiness is. If someone were to object to what I'm saying and say, wait a second, Dave, maybe we can't reach maximum net happiness. Well, all we need to understand is that we can be happier. There's clearly breakthroughs that you could have where you can be happier and other people can be happier. And so if you can improve, then whatever limitation there is, well, that's your maximum, right? So we know that we're not at the maximum yet because we can improve. And it doesn't matter if the maximum is like unlimited. That's fine if it isn't, because that's inherent with what I'm saying anyway. It's implied in what I'm saying. I'm just saying whatever the maximum is, we want to hit it. And if there is no maximum, without getting too much into this, it's fairly obvious to me that there's not an infinite amount of breakthroughs that we need to have in order to be maximally happy. What we can do is we can have all the breakthroughs we need to have, at which point then it's just flow. Then we just kind of experience being happy and do stuff. And maybe we can even increase happiness from there, but in a way that there's not impediments or resistance to having maximum happiness. Either way, currently, we need to have breakthroughs and we can improve our happiness. And so let's keep doing that until we're done with all the breakthroughs. So we've kind of logically gotten to the point where now our purpose can be boiled down logically to have all the breakthroughs necessary and consolidate them and stack them until there's no longer any resistance to us just experiencing maximum happiness or doing things that increase or lead to more happiness. So there's your life in a nutshell. Now, and to continue with that, you have a limited amount of resources. Whatever it is, you're not all-knowing and all-powerful. But neither do you have no resources, right? You have some amount of money, perhaps, but you have you have your brain that works for you even while you're sleeping. You have your conscious attention, and then you also have an ability to consciously affect your brain and other things in the external world with your intention in some way. And I call that seeking to understand what's good and true. So you have the ability to turn on or off seeking what's good or true consciously. Plus you have conscious attention, which is like the conscious part of your brain, but that in and of itself is not conscious. And then you have your brain's massive subconscious mechanism as well that's working beneath the level of your attention, or of even of its attention and sensory awareness. So the point is, you clearly have some amount of resources and they're limited, and we're trying to get to a purpose. And so then life becomes about directing our resources in the most effective manner, right? And therefore, we want to figure out importance constantly. So now we've logically gotten to the point where importance is logically connected to the whole ball of wax. It's logically connected to everything. The end all be all of our existence is we need to know what's most important so we can direct our resources there at any one time, we could say, just to kind of speak a little bit simply. My understanding of time is a little bit more correct and detailed than people normally assume, or that's in common culture, but it doesn't matter for here. Interestingly, and I apologize for a little bit of a teaser, but interestingly, I've never seen the correct understanding of time. I haven't seen anywhere. I've seen various guesses or things that sound kind of clever and unique, but they're incorrect. Okay, sorry about that. Back to, but there's nothing wrong with having some questions, right? To have a little bit of openness here and there. All right, so we boiled things down to importance being incredibly important, right? So the very idea of importance is important. The idea of understanding is, we want to understand understanding, we want to know how to have knowledge, we want to realize that importance is important. So then we can understand that by default, our brain is actually, it's good at some things, like default functioning of our thinking and our brain works for like keeping yourself fed, basically, and moving around in the physical environment. It works pretty well. You don't really bump into trees or buildings all that much, right? And people have babies and they take care of them and they tend to keep living these days, especially since we learn to wash our hands and use antibiotics and so forth. So default thinking works particularly close to perfectly in some areas, but it works particularly badly in other areas, and it works horribly when it comes to deciding to figure out what's actually important. And I don't just mean important in some philosophical sense. I mean in a very clear sense. Remember, what's important is where you want to direct your resources in order to achieve maximum net breakthroughs, and consolidate in order to have maximum net happiness. Your brain is incredibly, incredibly bad at this. So mostly you've been coasting on your brain's default thinking. I can almost guarantee you that throughout your entire life. And so you're probably, yourself, your brain, your mind, is probably incredibly, incredibly bad at figuring out what's important in life. It's probably really, really bad at it, like really bad. Okay, so you might feel like you're doing a pretty good job in life for other reasons, and you very well may be. I'm not being critical of you. But when it comes to importance, you're probably wildly off until you get your thinking straight. Let me add another couple of words onto this line here. I'm going to write norms and standards. All right, norms and standards are basically synonyms. I just put both words so it's kind of easier to see. The way, and I'm about to tell you something fairly quickly, but I'm about to tell you something that if you may have heard me say it, I've talked about it in my standalone series recently, but if you haven't heard me say it, or even if you have, this is exceptionally important, and it's another one of those things where if you get it, you're going to have an incredible jump in the quality of your life and in the effectiveness of your life. Your brain, by default, is organized not so much around survival per se, and not so much around various other things that people think like superiority or keeping. And so, well, it'll turn out that is the case, but with superiority. But it's not. That doesn't exactly catch what it is, or keeping up with the Joneses and so forth. Specifically, our brain is organized. You don't really have a lot of instincts as a human. What you have is your brain goes out in various topics or categories in life, and it tries to figure out what's normal, what's the standard, what are your peers doing, or what's the trend, or what's the way it normally happens, right? And then it either tries to be equal to that standard or some amount above that standard or below that standard. But even if you're trying to be above or below the standard, it's still relative to the norm or the standard. So if it comes to a simple way to illustrate what I'm saying is when it comes to money, your mind goes out and figures out what your peer group is, which may have changed when you entered OMG machines or after you've been here a few months or even a few days, several days or weeks, whatever, your brain might go and change who it thinks your peer group is to the OMG community, where you have hundreds of people making 10 or even not hundreds making 20,000 or more, but there's a lot. There's probably dozens making $20,000 a month or more, and there's plenty making 50. There's even a few making over $100,000 a month. But when I say a few, like really several, actually, people making that much. So previously, and that may or may not happen with your brain, but to the extent that it does, then that's a huge help for you just in your default thinking. We like to have our default thinking set at the most helpful place possible, because your default thinking is going to be going on all the time. It's a little bit like if you're swimming in the ocean and there's a current, then that current is going to affect you regardless of how good a swimmer you are, or even if you're in a boat, or whatever. The current will affect you to some degree. We want to be able to intervene with our default thinking, but one of the most effective and efficient ways to intervene, by the way, consciously, with your default thinking, with how your brain normally would work, or the conclusions your brain would normally come to, the most effective thing you can do often is to work on your default thinking itself, your mental models and your commonly recurring ideas, like the kinds of things we talk about here in Law of Implications. Extremely efficient. Anyhow, so when you understand how default thinking works, then you at least want to take advantage of it, as well as other times overcoming or rewiring it. But normally with your amount of money, then whatever your other peer group was when you're growing up, it first gets set and like what the people make in your neighborhood, especially if your neighborhood's kind of divided in your mind among people that are similar to you and people that aren't, then probably just the ones that are similar to you are the ones that help set that number. And then based on other messages you got from your parents or society, or maybe just kind of your personality predisposition that you're born with, however it happens, you may feel like being particularly superior to that, or that you might just want to, like, as long as you don't make like less than half of that number, you might feel okay, just depending on your particular personality. But even if you need to be significantly superior, then you're still, if the number is 50,000 as the default, if you can feel very superior at 100, right? So it's still set per year. Which I don't have any number in mind about what's worthy of respect, by the way, in terms of what somebody makes. So my nose, when I chuckled there, I was chuckling not at that's a small amount of money at all. I don't think it is. I don't have a judgment on how much money is a small or large amount to make. But I was chuckling because it's funny how in OMG machines, I have to clarify. That's what's funny. Like normally in normal life, you wouldn't have to clarify when you talk about $50,000 or $100,000. Then everyone knows that's per year. In OMG, we don't know that that's per year. But anyway, even if you want to be far superior to your peer group, and then the number gets set at $100,000 a year, then notice that it's still set relative to that standard or norm. It's double it, but it's still based upon it. That's why I'm not a big fan of private school, sending your kid to private school, or public school. But private school isn't much better because it's just trying to be a little bit superior to government school. But the government school sets the standard so terribly low, not even low, but so horribly negative and damaging to a child's psyche, where it's just terribly, basically abusive. Although you can't do much better by homeschooling your child unless you have your own ideas straight. So it might be perfectly fine to send your child to school unless you understand a number of good ideas. But this whole norms and standards thing gets even more reinforced and beaten into them in school. But anyway, I was using the illustration where private schools, they're still based around the norm or the standard of public schools. So they still have a tremendous amount of terrible and bad ideas. And even just on the scale of learning, and kids still learn extremely slowly in those schools compared to what they can learn. They're also learning subjects and information that's incredibly unimportant and irrelevant compared to what they could be learning in most cases as well. So I bring up this norms and standards thing because this is what your brain uses to decide what your goals are and what your motivation is. If you're procrastinating, part of this, if you feel like you're not motivated, then it generally it's going to have to do with a goal set regarding a norm and standard, and you feel like you've hit it. So what's the big deal? And so you can combine this norms and standards idea, which is how your brain is organized, and you can combine it with the linear milestone checkbox results based stacking that we've been talking about, and you can come up with even more understanding and stuff on your own. But this is what your brain's been using to determine importance. So for example, the stuff we talk about in law of implication, it's been beaten into you by default that everything we're talking about is basically unimportant, right? Or relatively unimportant. It's so incredibly important that you might also feel like it's important. And she might say, wait a second, Dave, I feel like this stuff matters. But really, I mean, do you? You might feel like it's very interesting and important, but why, when you were 12, didn't you spend the next 20 years or 30 years, several hours a day focused on figuring this stuff out? That only makes sense, right? How could you possibly be trying to live your life without even knowing what your purpose is, right? Almost nobody has figured out their purpose in a clear and specific manner. They have some approximation that's either wildly off or it's either decently off base or very off base. And it boils down to our brain is organized around norms and standards. So what people end up as their purpose by default is to stay within the norms and standards. And like when you ask someone, are you happy? They'll actually look around them and themselves, so to speak, like their brain will look around it and kind of see how it's doing in terms of various norms and standards and how they're doing compared to other people. And then they'll kind of come up with an answer about whether they're happy in general, as if happiness is like some overall kind of abstract figure or idea rather than something that you feel in the moment, and also that you feel net throughout your existence. Or I should say that kind of your happiness that you feel right now, it sums up, right? Like you feel a certain amount of happiness right now, and then the next moment and the next moment, and all that sums together, and that's your net happiness, and you want to maximize that. But your brain has no concept of that and no interest in that by default. It's just trying to keep you about on par with norms and standards, and that's an effective way to keep you breathing, right? And God didn't mess up when God designed your brain. It all works great. It's just meant you're supposed to work with it and seek to understand what's good and true, but people are not doing that. Again, if they were doing that, then they would spend as many decades as it takes, as many hours a day as it takes within reason, and figuring this stuff out. Instead, we send kids to school and we utterly ignore all this stuff I'm talking about, as if it's totally unimportant. And so it's such a powerful message, a powerful norm and standard. To me, what's normal is that when once someone gets their brain functioning a little bit, right, when they're, 12, 16, 25, 30, I don't know, but once you start to a little bit wake up in life and have some sense of things, then sure, you need some, decent way to make money, but how hard is that if you just are trying to, if you're just trying to have, just trying to get by, right, decently, then, and even then, I mean, you're 12, right, you don't need to worry about eating in most cases. Some people do, but plenty of people have parents who take care of that pretty well. And so why are we not spending just a ton of focus and time working on the ideas here? To me, that's normal, right? Normal is working on this stuff constantly. And not spending as long as it takes, even if it takes decades, to understand the stuff that I'm talking about here. Not because I'm talking about it, but because it's inherently important. To me, it's insane not to do that, right? But the norm and the standard out there is so wildly different than that to people in general, the way I act is totally an outlier. It's totally outside of the norm. But I figure I'm right and everyone else is wrong. Of course, I'm a little bit tongue-in-cheek when I'm saying that. But when you can understand something clearly, right, and you're stacking breakthroughs, then I clearly understand why this is correct. And so it must be the case that if someone's not doing it, then they're incorrect. It's not that I inherently think that I'm right when other people all disagree with me. I actually, if lots of people disagree with me, I consider that it's more likely that I'm wrong, right? I'm not, as arrogant as it might seem. But if I am very clear on something, then I'll still think that it's correct, no matter if everyone disagrees with me. Now, if people were to show me and walk me through on the level of the reasoning that I'm using here, why I'm wrong about why this stuff is important, stuff like purpose and and how we think and why we're here and stuff like that. All the stuff we talk about in law of implication. If someone were to show me why this is unimportant and why, these little things that people spend their time on constantly instead of doing this are more important, then I can listen as long as and maybe I am wrong, but someone would have to show me. But people aren't thinking that way. They don't have it clearly stated why all this stuff is unimportant. They just presume it isn't because of norms and standards. They just kind of watch what everyone else is doing, and then no one else is doing it. And so they don't do it either. One of the things I have to do realistically in my life is spend a lot of time literally alone. I don't mean lonely. I don't feel lonely, but I can't be around anybody else when I'm working on a lot of this stuff because it's just so hard for other people to treat this with the importance that it needs to be treated with. I'm blessed to have people close to me that do treat it like it's fairly important, and sometimes they treat it like it's extremely important. But the level of importance, it's just so hard for people to maintain the sense of how important this is because it's such a powerful message from norms and standards that it isn't. Okay, I need to wrap up this particular video because it's getting long. I might have a few more words to say about this line in the next video, but remember we're talking about breakthroughs and consolidating. And remember that part of why I'm talking about resource management and strategy being resource management, is that breakthroughs allow us to figure out what's an important place for us to put our resources. And it's not that we want to bring all our resources to bear. I'm sorry if I started to say that in another video, but then I did clarify. But remember that we want to make sure we bring enough resources that we have that they're proportional to the task or the result that we're trying to get ultimately, or the benefit that we're trying to get. But that they're enough to have the breakthrough or get over the threshold and with a buffer, but not more than what you need to have that buffer. Just understanding what we talked about here is going to make you the equivalent of a strategic genius in your life, right? Because you'll understand that strategy is nothing but resource management. There's no other second thing that strategy is. But that's a complicated thing ultimately because knowing where to divert resources, you do need to see where things are going. And there might be a lot of stuff you have to take into account to determine what's most important or whatever. But still, it's weirdly not that hard. I feel like my conclusions are brilliant, like in effect. But when I see how I do it, it's like a magician. I don't feel like I feel like I'm following a great process. And I feel like the result is a result often, or like my plans or something other people wouldn't have come up with. But it's not very mysterious. It's not like I have this very acute vision where like I look at a planning situation and I see so many things that people don't see. It's not like that. It's just that the way that I'm looking at it, where I'm just looking for the breakthroughs or thresholds or bottlenecks or places where it could be deadfalls, and spending resources just based on that, then everything just becomes quite easy. And people think that I planned ahead to such a degree, and then I saw so many details and I assimilated them, and I saw this coming and I saw that coming, and it's normally not like that at all. Where I wouldn't have thought of nearly all the things that actually ended up happening, but I ended up making plans that worked out perfectly given all the things that ended up happening because I focused in this way. And yet again, I didn't have to see all these things. It wasn't brilliant in that way that I saw all these possibilities and integrated them and all that stuff. People think that's what I'm doing. Maybe I shouldn't let the cat out of the bag and tell people that I'm not doing that. But again, I'm really not, and you don't need to either. It just all becomes so simple if we have this kind of core mental model. All right, I will end this video here and continue in the next one.